Thank you very much, Excellency. I acknowledge Minister Dwayne George, Ambassador Pilgrim, and all of the other distinguished ladies and gentlemen present here today, and certainly online. I acknowledge the resident coordinator, Mr. Springett, and his team. I'd like to take this opportunity to extend my sincere gratitude to the United Nations resident coordinator covering Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean, Mr. Springett, for his distinguished leadership and certainly for his unwavering support for Antigua and Barbuda, and certainly for the assistance has been rendered to Antigua and Barbuda to develop this very critical roadmap. They refer to it as building resilience. I will turn it around and say resilience building. And that is precisely what we are seeking to do here. I observe that Mr. Charles would have made a conditional statement to the effect that if we adopt the 17 recommendations, then we will enjoy some level of success. I want to reassure Mr. Springer, not Mr. Springer, Mr. Charles, and certainly all of the others, of our commitment here in Antigua and Barbuda to building critical resilience as we seek to achieve resilient prosperity for our people. And I'll spend some time to state categorically some of the things that we are doing here in Antigua and Barbuda to build resilience across the various sectors. We understand our vulnerability. Antigua and Barbuda is one of the smallest democracies globally, one of the smallest small island states. In fact, when you look at the size of our population and the size of our economy, we're not just a small state, we're a micro-state. And we have certain vulnerabilities. Some of them are structural, size, of course. Even in terms of climate, that is a significant vulnerability. So our vulnerabilities spread across the social, economic, and certainly environmental aspects. So there are significant vulnerabilities right across the various dimensions. Those who spoke before spoke about our vulnerability in terms of food, energy, and financing. I do accept that those are critical areas in which we need to build resilience, especially in the area of food security. And again, we're one of the most food insecure countries in the world. In fact, 80% of the foods that we consume, they are imported primarily from the United States. Some of it comes from Brazil, transit through US ports, including Miami. So the issue of food security is extremely important because we're so vulnerable that if the food boats do not come here for maybe 2-3 weeks, many of us will starve in this country. And I don't think that our people have given serious consideration to the extent of that vulnerability. You just observe that any time at all the food boats from Miami are late, just by a few days, check the supermarket shelves. So just imagine if for some instability or maybe some policy of the United States in which they ban food exports, imagine what will happen to us. And that is one of the reasons to why I even took a personal interest in farming, to lead from the front. It's not because I'm seeking to enrich myself as how my detractors would have stated, but to literally destigmatize agriculture and to encourage larger investments in agriculture so that we can increase our production and become a more food-secured country or nation. So it's important that we increase our agricultural production in order to mitigate this risk of food security. The reality is we were not as vulnerable in the sense that in the past we used to rely on domestically produced produce and meats, our fish, even the small ruminants. We used to produce them in greater quantities. Seems as though that we have become almost exclusively reliant on imports now. And if it's one call I want to make today to all Antiguans and Barbudans, is for all of us to play a role in contributing to our food security. Even if it means planting a few fruit trees, not only in your backyards, but at the same time, even in public spaces, even addressing the issue of hunger as part of our zero hunger strategy. And I want to remind all of us too that food security is everybody's business, and I'll say more so than tourism, because at the end of the day, if you can't feed the tourists, they ain't coming. And if we can't feed ourselves, then we know the consequences are. So let us take our food security seriously. Insofar as the government's role, we have been investing significantly in this sector, and within the upcoming months, you will see more and more interventions as we seek to build out the, let's say, agricultural infrastructure in order to increase food production. But where I think we are lacking, we're not attracting sufficient private investments in that sector. I know it's a difficult sector. I mean, when you look at the fact that we do not get a lot of precipitation. In fact, a few years ago, precipitation fell as low as about 17 inches in a 12-month period. And so it's very difficult. But what we're doing as a government is that we're now helping farmers to build out dams and ponds so that if they have significant water catchment and you get 1 or 2 good showers a year, you can literally fill those ponds, and that can provide some level of water security. So you will observe during the upcoming months that we'll be building more of those ponds, we'll be enhancing existing ones, and at the same time, we will continue to incentivize and subsidize agriculture. I believe that we have one of the strongest programs of subsidies anywhere in the world. We subsidize water by about 25%. And if you have to look at it in the context of the cost of water in this country, generally speaking, all consumers are subsidized heavily. APA makes a loss for water alone of about $30 million a year. But in addition to that, we still give the farmers a further 25% subsidy. So technically speaking, I would say that the subsidy that our people are enjoying, generally speaking, is at least 50%. And if you add that additional 25%, farmers are probably getting a 75% subsidy for the water that they use in farming. But clearly, we cannot sustain farmers using expensive reverse osmosis water. I mean, that is just not sustainable. Because ultimately someone has to carry the cost. If not the farmer, it will be the government. And that is why we're building out these ponds and these dams to make sure that they have a significant source of cheap fresh water. In terms of water sustainability, which is also critical, because we're one of the most water-scarce countries in the world. We have invested hundreds of millions now in building out our water infrastructure. By September of this year, we'll be able to produce about 12.5 million gallons of water per day. And that should be able to satisfy the water demand for potable water. And again, we're trying to wean our farmers off of using potable water and to use these dams to do their irrigation. So again, building water security, energy security as well is an issue that we're addressing in a very significant way. In Barbuda, for example, currently Barbuda is powered about 15 hours a day by renewable energy. And we intend to expand that plant shortly so that our sister island Barbuda will be powered exclusively by renewable energy. We continue to build out the renewable energy infrastructure here, and by 2030, we expect to reduce our emissions by about 50%. And hopefully by about 2040, we will achieve full decarbonization and become a carbon neutral state. So again, we are building resilience, I should say rather, in this energy sector to reduce our reliance on fossil fuel energy. Financial resilience, well, we're not only looking at the domestic aspects, but even in terms of the international financial architecture. Antigua and Barbuda has been one of the most consistent advocates for access to concessional financing, even though we do not benefit from a significant amount of ODA or concessional loans. And that is because of a relatively high per capita income of $22,000 per head. So Unfortunately, we've been penalized for our successes, but as you know too, Antigua and Barbuda would have championed the development of the MVI, that is the Multi-Dimensional Vulnerability Index, in which I would have co-chaired the expert panel that developed that index. And we are now advocating for its global use within the international financial institutions, as well as the multilateral banks and various bilateral relationships between governments. And on the basis that the MVI is utilized, which is a more important and certainly a more equitable and perhaps a fairer assessment of need, I think that Antigua and Barbuda and other countries that hitherto were unable to achieve concessional funding will be able to make the case, and we should see some improvement there as we seek to ensure that there's greater access. But even within our own domestic space, we're also ensuring that we provide increased access for our entrepreneurs, even our farmers. In fact, we have the Entrepreneurial Development Fund, which was established a few years ago, and we offer funding between 1% and 3%. Farming, for example, those who borrow for farming purposes, they pay 1%. So again, you're seeing that the cost of money is subsidized. We're hoping, though, that there will be a greater uptake. I think on average we're doing about $1.5 million per year. We plan to further capitalize the fund by increasing it to about $10 million. I believe they have about $5 million in their account currently. But what is important is for Antiguans and Barbudans in all sectors, especially the productive sectors, to avail themselves of these cheap monies and to increase the level of entrepreneurship, because one of the areas of resilience too that we're looking at is the issue of economic resilience. We can speak about social and environmental resilience, but if there is no economic resilience, then you cannot sustain the social and environmental resilience that we are seeking to develop. And therefore, it means that the economy has to be robust. We need more entrepreneurs. We need existing entrepreneurs to expand their business, to increase trade. And at the same time, as we increase trade, we are providing great opportunities for employment, especially for our females and other poor and vulnerable groups. And increased economic activities also mean increased taxes, increased revenues, so that we can do more, build out more climate resilient infrastructure. And as I speak about the issue of climate resilient infrastructure, you would know that there's currently a raging debate in the public as we seek to increase the registration fee for motor vehicles to raise a bond of about $100 million to build out more climate resilient infrastructure. In fact, what we intend to do, as far as practicable, is to build out more climate resilient roads using roller compacted concrete. And we have invested so far over $20 million in acquiring the necessary equipment so that we can build more resilient roads going forward. And I certainly would hope that those of you who are here who understand the need for more climate resilient infrastructure will help to educate the rest of the population as to why this initiative is so important. Because the reality is, when you look at the effects of climate, we consistently experience these heat waves. They're literally melting the tar that we put on our roads. And in addition to that, when we have these heavy rains, when it does rain, the surface is actually washed away by these torrential rains. So we now have to go towards more resilient roads, more concrete roads, in order to ensure that we don't have to keep rebuilding these roads, these asphalt roads, which clearly, in the context of a very harsh environment, climate environment, that are not sustainable anymore. But again, building concrete roads require a significant amount of resources. And as you know, we are a can-do government, and we recognize that we have to step up, we have to raise the funding. And even though some may be offended, what we're doing here is all part of building resilience. And that is what the discussion is about this morning, to build resilience, not just climate resilience, to include better infrastructure, but also health and other social resilience, as well as economic resilience, which I spoke about earlier. As far as social resilience is concerned, I think Antigua and Barbuda has one of the largest cadre of social programs of any other country within the Caribbean. So, for example, we have the Petro Caribbean initiative, in which we provide up to, some individuals will get as much as almost $500 part of the utility program, and again, the other subsidy for persons with disabilities and other vulnerabilities. We also have a separate food voucher program in which we distribute up to $200 to very vulnerable individuals and families. And we have school meals program in which we provide school meals for free for our students, school uniform program, you name it. You have the GRACE program as well. We also have the HAPPY program, in which we provide home repairs and in some instances build completely new homes for very poor and vulnerable persons. So again, you can see that we are literally building resilience right across the various or the spectrum, or the different dimensions for that matter, social, economic, and environmental. Even in terms of health and health resilience, we continue to invest heavily in our health infrastructure. We're currently constructing a renal unit, which will be constructed at a cost of $21 million, and that will help us to expand renal care to also include the amount of renal transplants that we do annually. And we also in the process of establishing a cardiac unit at Mount St. John. The cancer center is currently being renovated, and when it reopens within a matter of maybe, I'd say 60 days, it will offer a number of novel cancer treatments. In fact, I believe too that cancer center will be a net exporter of services within the region based on the type of novel cancer treatments that we offered. And obviously, locals will pay a fraction of what the non-regional individuals will pay for treatments, and even regional individuals will pay for their treatments. So again, we understand the need for us to pursue resilience building in an integrated way, and to build out the socioeconomic and environmental infrastructure in such a way in which Antiguans and Barbudans in the near future could achieve resilient prosperity. But evidently, we require the partnership of institutions to include the various UN agencies, UNDP and other agencies, and even governments who have assisted us on a bilateral basis, not only in terms of assisting us with financing, but certainly technical expertise. In fact, in the era of digitization, for example, which is now becoming a significant threat in the sense that if we do not improve our digital infrastructure and start to deliver educational and healthcare services using digital technologies to include artificial intelligence, we'll be left behind. And many of you would have noted the conclusions of the recent World Bank study, in which they recognize, or they have concluded, that our education is no longer fit for purpose. And I believe one of the ways in which we can build resilience in that sector and to ensure that our education system delivers this kind of skills for people is by utilizing technology, to use ICT-based learning technologies, and at the same time to utilize artificial intelligence to ensure that we can provide better healthcare services, better educational services, and even using AI, for example, in terms of analyzing data. Well, first of all, accumulating data and analyzing data, because it's a problem within literally all developing countries. We have significant data gaps, and AI can help us to not only collate information, but with the analysis, and to develop certain patterns and to help us with our decision-making process going forward. So we accept all of the 17 recommendations, and I could go on and on in terms of showing how we are building out resilience and how we are investing, even in the digital era that I just spoke about. Antigua and Barbuda, within the next 18 months, the government itself will have its own subsea cable. So we're now spending in the region about $20 million to bring our own subsea cable to the shores of Antigua and Barbuda from the shores of the United States. And why we're doing that? You may say, well, look, we have 2 providers already of those services. We have Cable and Wireless, we have Flow. But we recognize, based on the use of technology literally in all sectors of our economy, especially for healthcare and for education, and the type of bandwidth that we will need to deliver those services, if we do not have our own subsea cable, the cost of providing those services, that type of bandwidth that will be necessary, even within our homes, it'll become cost prohibitive if we have to rely on the private suppliers. So we're investing in our own bandwidth. So for example, within your homes, we can probably give you 10 times the bandwidth at the same cost based on this investment that we're making. Within our schools, we don't want to have a situation in which our students are constrained by limited bandwidth. They must have as much bandwidth as possible so they too can develop products and even possible products for exportation. So again, we're not just speaking about these issues, we are making the tangible investments. In education, you know, for example, that commencing this year, we're spending in the region of $80 million to expand UE5 Islands to make sure it becomes a model campus of the University of the West Indies, certainly a model university campus globally, literally concentrating on the skills, let's say the modern skills that are necessary for the development of our country and even the other Caribbean countries. I mean, when you look at the other campuses, for example, I would say that they are concentrating and have been concentrating on the traditional learning areas. I mean, the arts and even in terms of law and medicine and so on. What we're seeking to do here now is to ensure that this campus focuses on the modern skills that are required to ensure that we can satisfy the labor requirements, not only of Antigua and Barbuda, the OECS, but also the broader Caribbean region. So again, I just want to reassure Dr. Charles and all the others that we have, in essence, on our own volition, would have established a framework that is in keeping with the 17 recommendations that were made in this roadmap. So in other words, we are fully aligned, which tells me that we should be able to achieve a significant amount of progress. And, you know, they always say that, you know, the proof of the pudding is not only in eating, but in terms of the effectiveness of any plan, it's about implementation. Implementation. The good news is that many of these initiatives, we are already at the implementation stage. So perhaps this plan, as you tweak it, you may have to probably take into consideration the things that are taking place already. It's pointless writing a plan, I'm not being overly critical or being rude here, telling us what to do when we're doing it already. So you may have to look at the implementation, or let's say focus more on the implementation, how we can achieve greater efficacious implementation of these plans, and even initiatives that go beyond what we have at this point, because if not, you'll be literally documenting things that we're doing, and it would mean therefore that by the time we get this plan, it will become redundant. So we don't want you to tell us about things that we are doing or things that we have done. So in order to ensure the relevance, and again, I'm not being overly critical, I like to go the extra mile to tell people that I'm not a rude person, I'm just a frank person. And I want you to think a little more critically, to go beyond the current thinking of the cabinet and even the leader of this country in terms of the framework that we have established already, and to let us know how we can go beyond the current thinking to create greater value for the people of Antigua and Barbuda and the Caribbean region as a whole. And finally, I just want to say here that you know, the government of Antigua and Barbuda is eager to see our citizens, our communities, and our society as a whole become more resilient in the face of the various challenges, and the challenges are numerous, not only in terms of the instability created from these wars and the geopolitical situation in various countries, including the United States. All these will add to our vulnerabilities, so we want to make sure that we have a robust plan and one that could be implemented in a very efficacious manner. And we certainly look forward to the finalization of this document and the next steps, which I said should go beyond what we're doing now. Thank you.